Hey, friends. Have you ever been told that your symptoms are all in your head when you know that is definitely not the case and something is truly wrong? If so, you are definitely not alone. As infuriating as it is, so many chronic illness journeys begin with misdiagnosis, especially in those cases where the nervous system is at the core of the problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Raelan, and on this channel, we dive into recovery stories from MECFS, long COVID, and other conditions that conventional medicine unfortunately still doesn't have all the answers for. But there is so much we can learn from people who have fully recovered. Today, I'm excited to introduce Tana Murtagh, a therapist in Calgary over in Canada, which incidentally is where I was born. Very exciting. His journey started with a really bad case of fibromyalgia, lots of chronic pain, anxiety attacks, and deep confusion because his doctors could not agree on what was wrong. Turns out the root of his pain was neuroplastic, an injury to the nervous system, and that meant that recovery was possible. So you're not going to want to miss this. He is absolutely amazing, so insightful, explains things so clearly and so well in a way that's just going to have little light bulbs going off for you. You're like, yes, okay, that makes sense. Now I get that. And just an overall really wonderful, likable guy. So very excited. Let's do this. Tanner, amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, it's very nice to be on.
So you have your own journey with chronic pain and with your own health stuff. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this was over a decade ago, actually, now. I developed chronic pain kind of in my early 20s, I would say. And when I was healing or when I was starting to develop pain, it was really minor at first. I think for a lot of people probably watching the channel, it kind of spread over time. So at the time I was actually training for my first triathlon ever. That was the goal with one of my friends.
Wow.
And what happened was I was running a lot, probably, 50, 60 kilometers a week. And I started to develop pain in my right knee. And it was pretty minor. There might have been a slight injury. It's hard looking back to kind of figure that out. But over time, over about 3.5 years, it just spread. So at first it was in my right knee, and then it went to my left knee. And then it eventually was in, both of my shoulders. And one of my more debilitating symptoms was my back. So probably about 1.5 years in, my back started to become more and more painful. And like a lot of people that have had chronic pain and symptoms, your first stop is the medical system, of course. So I did every medical test you can imagine, all these different treatments, physios, chiros, pain medication, and it was just getting worse. And the messaging that I was getting from doctors was one that was very fear enticing, unfortunately. So as it was spreading, there really wasn't good news. People were confused why it was happening. Some doctors were saying, this is fibro. This is what's going on for you. And I remember one doctor even told me that I had hypersensitive nerves and that I was going to be in pain the rest of my life. So not a great message to be given at that point. And yeah, it just went on. And I think like a lot of people with chronic pain, chronic illness, it was almost this trauma response that I had to it. When I'm working with people, I often talk about how chronic pain, chronic illness can be traumatic. It really can. And when I talk about trauma, I'm talking about this prolonged state of fight, flight, freeze, shutdown. That's what trauma is. That's the response in the nervous system. That actually is what trauma is. It's not the memory, it's not the event, it's the response in the nervous system. And for a lot of people with chronic pain or illness, we have this response because it's confusing. We're given scary messages by doctors. We're doing scary medical procedures. And so what happened for me is I was constantly in this fight or flight zone at first, where I was just perpetually highly anxious, highly angry about the symptoms that I was having. And then over time, I think probably around the 2-year mark, I just completely shut down. So I went into despair, hopeless, helpless, numb. I was disconnected. my partner, who I'm still with now, like there was just no connection with anyone. Like I was just completely closed off because it felt hopeless. Like no matter what treatment I did, no matter what procedure I did, no matter what specialists I saw, I was just told that this was going to be a forever thing. And so, probably around 3.5 years in, like a lot of people that have come to a mind body approach, I was actually up late one night because my back and hips would hurt really bad when I would try to sleep. So I came across this YouTube video when I was up super late, and it was basically this like 7-part series of this guy talking about how he recovered from his chronic pain using a mind-body approach. And he specifically talked about Dr. Sarno, which is a lot of where this mind-body approach kind of originates, is from Dr. Sarno. And, you know, we've come a long way since then, but it really does originate there. And at first I thought it was pretty ridiculous. Like I thought it was a bit of a hoax. And I was pretty desperate. So I bought one of Dr. Sarno's books. I started reading it, got more angry, stopped reading it. And the interesting part is, you know, I'm a therapist, right? So like I know that pain and physical symptoms can be produced by the brain and nervous system. Like I've learned this in school. Like we've talked about this lightly. So I know about these ideas. But I was like, there's no way that that's what's causing it for me. And I think a few more months went by, and eventually like I came around, partly because my friends and my partner were just telling me like, this is what it is. Like there's nothing else going on here. This is, you know, more of a mind body issue that you're facing. So I got a lot of pressure from my friends, my family, because they knew this was like a mind body issue. Like my mental health had deteriorated so far. I had all the signs. Like I'd faced childhood adversity. I'd gone through even like an addiction to drugs and alcohol when I was like a teenager. There was a lot of signs that this is likely an emotional thing that's developed over time. And not to mention like the high, you know, fight, flight, freeze, shutdown kind of energy I was feeling all the time. You know, when I'm working with someone, you can't separate those out. Like you can't separate out trauma and chronic pain or illness. Like that's just not the thing. You can't separate out your anxiety from your chronic pain or illness. That's not how we function. Like our brain, nervous system, body, they all function together. They all work together. And so if we're having, you know, mental health concerns, if we're facing emotional issues, it's going to have an effect on your chronic pain or illness, and it might even be triggering, perpetuating it. So I really dove into it at this point. I read a bunch of books. I read Dr. Schubner's book. I was doing emotional work. I did a lot of brain retraining, exposure work, because at that point I was barely moving. Like I was isolated to my basement essentially. Didn't move, didn't walk, didn't use my arms. Even when I went on my last holiday, I used like a wheelchair. So there was like a lot of work to be done. And, you know, when I talk about with people, you know, areas you need to focus on to heal, this is how I kind of built the approach that my clinic uses. And also like our upcoming course uses, as we talk about kind of five factor model. And I call this approach the somatic safety method. And we didn't just make this up. Like we pulled from all sorts of areas. We didn't just make this approach up. We pulled from a lot of evidence-based models. So we pulled from pain reprocessing therapy. We pulled from emotional awareness and expression therapy, which is Dr. Schubner's model. We pulled from somatic experiencing, polyvagal theory. And we also do certain like Qigong moves and things for like somatic practices as well. Yeah, so when I was healing and when I'm working with people therapeutically, there's kind of 5 factors that I've found really, really effective. And so, you know, the first thing is your thoughts and beliefs, because we know this from research. You know, your thoughts and beliefs about your body, about your pain, about your symptoms, they're going to have a real effect on if that dial gets turned up or down in terms of your intensity. And so the starting place in terms of a mind-body approach and when I was healing is we need to change our thoughts and beliefs about why the symptoms are there and that our body is actually safe, physically safe, or safer than we once thought. Because for myself, I had all these scary beliefs. I remember walking around and thinking my poor spine was crunching. It was just getting worse by the day. And if you want a surefire way of worsening your back pain, that's probably how you're going to do it. And so we need to change the thoughts and beliefs. And so when I'm working with someone, we're gathering evidence. We're looking for the evidence of, is this a mind body concern? And what I mean by that is that the brain and nervous system are producing these physical symptoms because it's stuck in a state of survival. We talk about physical symptoms. I talk about them with people as meaningful messages. They're meaningful messages. For myself, there was a meaningful message that my life was getting too intense. I've been known to be a bit of a perfectionist. My life was getting too intense, too fast paced, too much pressure. There was a meaningful message that I was not dealing with my emotions. I was not attending to my body and nervous system. And so these meaningful messages, they're going to be different person to person, but we got to view them as that. And so when we're changing our thoughts and beliefs, we're changing our thoughts and beliefs about our body and our physical symptoms. And this is really the starting place. Now, when I'm working with people, it's more of a somatic lens, but I do spend a bit of time on just negative thinking in general. Because for a lot of people with chronic pain and symptoms, they perpetually have fear thoughts, despairing thoughts, obsessive thinking. Even for myself, I can be a bit of an obsessive guy, and it's been dialed down over time. Now, the second component that we're working on with people, and that I did a lot of, is brain retraining and exposure. Because over time, your brain essentially learns to produce the pain or physical symptoms really well. Learning's great when we're learning to walk, talk, ride our bike, all these different things, but it really sucks when we're learning things that are unpleasant, such as pain or symptoms. And so I do a lot of brain retraining with people. Even for myself, I did a lot of this in terms of like somatic tracking and the exposure work. I tell people you're not going to heal by avoiding. It doesn't mean go out and do absolutely everything that you've been avoiding for the last, X amount of years, but there needs to be an approach. We need to approach instead of avoid. And for myself, I was very isolated to my basement, wasn't moving, wasn't using my body basically at all. I was scared. I was terrified to walk more than 5 minutes at a time. And so I really had to do a lot of exposure work early on of starting to walk and change my emotional response, change my nervous system's response as I was doing that. And especially in the first 4 months of my healing, like it took me about, I would say 8 months total to heal. It took me about 4 months once I learned about a mind body approach for my symptoms to not become chronic. And it took probably another 4 so I could get back to using my body fully. Now, I'm cautious saying that because people always want to know, and you're probably asked this a lot too, like, how long is it going to take me to heal? And the problem with that question is everyone's brain and nervous system is different. So it's not like there's this like benchmark of, Tanner healed in 8 months. So that's what's going to happen to me. It could be a lot quicker. It could be a lot slower. It's going to be different. But an essential part of where I see people's healing get stalled is they're not doing the exposure work of starting to actually live their life, starting to approach activities they want to do. And so that's kind of the second component that I used a lot of and that I use a lot with clients. The third, which is probably not shocking to people, is processing of emotion. This is really essential. On my channel and when I'm working with clients, I kind of have a set step-by-step process that I go through with people in terms of exploring their emotions and learning to release them and move through them. We need to do that. I've worked with people where they don't want to approach their emotions. Emotions are scary. I get it. We don't want to feel it. It's not enjoyable to attend to. It's not a good time. And so as a result, we just shut ourselves off. But the problem is that it's not the difficult emotion triggering your pain or symptom, because that's the equation people have. And I hear this a lot. Difficult emotions equals pain or symptoms. That's not how it functions. If you add difficult emotions plus resistance, you're going to get pain or symptoms. And so, I am notoriously bad for this and still learning. I want to be clear with people of like the resistance. For myself, one thing I noticed in myself early on, I would rather clean my house for 3 hours than feel anger for 10 minutes. It sounds great. You get a really clean house. There's no question there. But it's just, there was just this perpetual defenses going on to not feeling things. And that's what it is. When we talk about the nervous system, what's going to make you feel more dysregulated is resisting important emotions you're meant to feel. And there's so much research on this from Dr. Sarno, Dr. Schubiner, Dr. Lumley. Like, there's a lot of evidence here that we need to actually approach emotions and not just approach them and let them loose and, get to this real dysregulated place, but we need to approach them with a sense of safety and compassion as we're feeling. And so this is kind of the third piece that I talk about with people. Now, the fourth that I also did a lot of work on, and I use a lot of with people, is nervous system regulation and processing of trauma. Nervous system regulation, understanding your autonomic nervous system and how it affects your chronic pain and symptoms, because there is a real linkage there. This is the meaningful message. When your nervous system gets dysregulated, and I won't go too sciencey here, but when it gets dysregulated, we go into perpetual states of fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown. Chronic pain and symptoms are just the result. Like, we're not meant as human beings to be there perpetually. But the unfortunate part is we have these big fancy brains that don't allow us to naturally move through dysregulation, kind of like animals do. Animals do this really, really well. But humans, unfortunately, we're really smart. And as a result, we resist that, or we don't allow ourselves to kind of move through it. And so nervous system regulation is essential. I teach people about their nervous system. I teach people about the connection to their symptoms and essentially how you can create regulation. Part of that could be the processing of emotions, but there's lots of things we need as human beings. We need time for rest. We need time for play. We need time to be intimate with friends or partners. We need all of these things. And if we don't have them, our nervous system gets really out of balance. And this can lead into processing of trauma. We know the connection here. Your rate of developing chronic pain or chronic illness goes through the roof if you have trauma in your past. And I don't mean like a traumatic event happened and you have chronic pain or symptoms develop initially. That can take place, and I've seen that happen. But if you have like childhood adversity that you've faced, and it's not about the size of the event I talk about with people. For myself, I was bullied growing up. And when I look back, I really went into this shutdown response. And so it's not about the size of the event, but if you have all these traumas from childhood or adulthood, your rate of chronic pain or illness goes up. So it only makes sense that we need to process some of that. And I did a lot of work on myself as I was doing this and actually healing. And so that's the fourth. And the fifth area that we talk about that I think sometimes is missed in a mind body approach, and I think it's really vital people take an honest look at their lives around this, is what we call social safety. And so when we talk about social safety, this includes your lifestyle, how you're living, but it also includes various factors in your life. Because if the lifestyle that you're living is perpetually sending signals of danger to your brain and nervous system, it does not matter how many fancy brain retraining techniques you do. It doesn't matter how many somatic nervous system regulation practices you do. Like, we're almost applying band-aids. And I've seen this for people where they're working 80 hours a week. And yes, they're doing all the techniques, but naturally their lifestyle is perpetuating this state of danger. And again, symptoms are a meaningful message. So if we're not listening and we're just applying band-aids, it's not going to be helpful. And we know for a lot of people with mind-body issues, myself included, we got perfectionism, people-pleasing, excessive conscientiousness. And over time, I have all these still, but they've just been dialed back. And that's what we're kind of looking for. But the other thing we talk about in terms of social safety is we talk about, life factors like work, school, home life, hobbies, friends, family. These are all factors, even societal factors, bigger societal factors or discrimination that's taking place. They are either sending signals of safety or danger to your brain and nervous system. And some of these things, they require hard changes. Like when I was healing, I always tell people there are friends that I am no longer friends with. And I don't regret those choices. It was just relationships that were not going to help me cultivate a sense of ease and safety in my brain and nervous system. So that's kind of, how I started to heal is using these 5 factors. And over the course of about 8 months, I was using my body fully and got to a place where, you know, the symptoms weren't chronic anymore. I always tell people it's not like you never have symptoms again, even for myself. They pop up now and then. But what we're trying to remove is the chronic element of them.
That was so incredibly well explained. I was just thinking to myself, I have to get a transcript of this interview because I want to go back and reread it. And you just really succinctly explained really complex things that I think can be hard to internalize. I love the meaningful messages for symptoms. What a great way to just put yourself at ease about them. Just saying that term, meaningful messages, just makes me happy.
Yeah.
It's a great way to think about it. And the emotions plus resistance, because we hear a lot of people talk about this comes from repressed emotions and we use all these different terms. But what does that mean? And it can sound very vague, like repressed emotions. Like, is this some voodoo happening in my brain? I don't know what to do about that. But emotions plus resistance is such an incredible way to understand what's happening. And a lot of people, myself included, once they come through these conditions, can have some fear around like, your life has to be perfect and no stress and no negative emotions. Yeah, so we come out of this with this fear, like we have to live in this utopia, otherwise we're going to have chronic pain again, we're going to have chronic fatigue syndrome again. But it's not that we can't handle stress and pain and all of those things, it's that resistance around it. So as long as the resistance isn't there, because we're built to handle stress, there's no way getting through life without it. So yeah, I love all of that. Thank you. Explained that so well.
Yeah, it's such a misconception, and I'm careful with it too. We thought long and hard about, what we want to call our approach where we're pulling all these models from. And we called it the somatic safety method. Here's the issue that happens to people is they equate safety with calmness. Mm. That's the big mistake. And there's nothing wrong with calmness. Yes, you need more calmness probably to heal if you're perpetually in fight or flight. But that's a misconception that takes place is we know that physical symptoms are danger signals. And so the solution is safety, like all those 5 factors I talked about, but that's what we're creating. We're creating safety. But people confuse that means they have to be calm all the time. And I did this. I tried this when I was healing. And at various points when I lose track and lose insight, what'll happen is people are trying to force themselves to be calm all the time. And you're trying to force your nervous system in this place where it doesn't want to be there all the time. That's not what it's naturally designed to do. And so when we talk about safety, safety is not just, calmness. It can include elements of that, but it's being able to be in the here and now, be very connected, have some of that calmness energy with it. But even when you're in an anxious state, you can cultivate a feeling of safety. You can cultivate an ability to be in the here and now, in your body, with, whatever emotion or anxiety that you're feeling. And so it's such a misconception which turns people in the wrong direction. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do practices every day to cultivate calmness. Every day I do breath work. It's great. It's useful. But I know that I'm not going to be perpetually in a state of calm all day. That's just not how we're designed to function, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very well said. So you talked about pain reprocessing therapy, and this is something that I'm hearing about more and more. So can you tell us what exactly is that?
Yeah, so pain reprocessing therapy is a big part of like the approach we use. Like when I'm working with clients, I'm pulling from elements of pain reprocessing therapy, and it's it's picking up steam because there's research to back that it's useful in actually reducing chronic pain. And so pain reprocessing therapy, it's essentially a system of psychological techniques meant to end the cycle of chronic pain or symptoms. And so when I talked about brain retraining, when I talked about thoughts and beliefs, when I talked about exposure and actually approaching things, that's what we're really pulling from pain reprocessing therapy. They've done a great job, Alan Gordon and his team, in creating a model
that really supports people in changing their thoughts and beliefs about their body, their physical symptoms, on using what we call somatic tracking. And we can do a whole interview on that. But somatic tracking is essentially a tool, it's an exposure tool where we're approaching the pain or symptom, but we're learning to emotionally respond different to it. And by doing that, the pain or symptoms can actually start to reduce over time. And a big part of pain reprocessing therapy, so when I was talking about approaching instead of avoiding, that's like what how you could like basically sum up pain reprocessing therapy is there needs to be an approaching. There needs to be approaching of the sensations in your body. There needs to be an approaching of movements, of positions, of things that you thought were causing your chronic pain and symptoms. And there needs to be an approaching of your life and living life again. And essentially, you're trying to create safety as you're approaching these things, where you can be in the present, you can have a lightness, you can have a curiosity and ease with it. And so, you know, that's a great starting place for people. When I'm working with new clients, like I spend quite a bit of time there because it really can have a lot of benefit in reducing pain and symptoms, as I've seen personally, but also in the work that I have with clients.
This is incredible. Your approach, in my experience, from my research, from all the people I've interviewed, is bang on. It's hitting all the main things that are helping people get past these conditions. I absolutely love this. This is so incredibly valuable. I'm so glad that you're out in the world doing this because we need this so much. And you just have a way of explaining things in a way that makes sense. So, for people who are watching, I'm sure will be curious about the work that you do, or what would it look like to get involved? Are you taking on new clients? What are the options? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I have a few projects on the go. I try not to be too intense with my life, but I do get excited about this stuff. I have a YouTube channel people can check out. There's lots of, if people are just learning, there's lots of free resources on there, brain retraining exercises, somatic practices people can check out. We also do a podcast. I do that with my partner, my wife, Anne. And, we offer lots of resources on there that people can check the links out to that. I run a clinic in Canada, specifically Calgary, Alberta. And we're actually able to work with people in several provinces in Canada. So I've created like a group of therapists that basically provide the model that I just kind of described to you during this interview. And so there's always therapists that are accepting new clients at the clinic. And my latest project, my biggest project that's gone on for about a year is we started another agency called Embody Community. And I had this dream of making this incredibly comprehensive digital course, which took me well over a year to develop. And I did that with my colleagues, Ann Hampson and Alex Klassen. And yeah, it's a huge course. It hasn't launched yet. We're hoping to launch it probably in mid-July. And what it involves is kind of over 10 hours of educational video-based learning. We have over 60 plus audio and video somatic practices and brain retraining exercises. So I went a little too intense on that section of the course, but there's more than you would need there. And then we have about 30 plus like interactive worksheets that people get access to. So people can check the link out for that as well. That course hopefully will launch mid-July, but we're just finishing up a few things.
All right, incredible. And of course, all of this will be linked in the video description. So people watching, I really encourage you to expand that description and take a look at what's there. Seriously, everything Tanner is doing 100% echoes what I've heard from people who recover, from everything I read, from all the latest research. He is on top of this stuff. He knows his stuff. Yeah, some good stuff to check out. And I'm curious too, because I mentioned for people watching about the transcripts, would you find it helpful to have a link to a transcript to the interviews in the video description so you could just go back and read and maybe see some of the things and read again? If you think that would be helpful, let me know in the comments, because I'm sure it's not that difficult for us to start including that for you guys. But yeah, thank you so much, Tanner. This has been so educational. I can't wait to go back and read this and probably watch it again. I appreciate you and all that you're doing. And I'm so glad that you've come past all of your challenges. Oh my goodness, so much to go through at such a young age. But incredible to see where you are now. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. And also, as always, special shout out at the end of my videos to one of our channel members. So today it is Linda Griffin. Big hugs to you, Linda. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining the channel and becoming a member. I appreciate the support. So yeah, thank you again, Tanner. Thanks to all of you watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And I hope to see you in this next one.